Hi everyone, welcome to another Blender Community Roundup. In this series we take a look at cool and interesting things happening in and around the Blender community. So that's new tutorials, tools, resources, projects, etc. You seem to really like the last video, so that's why I'm doing 2 in a row. So please let me know if you find this one useful as well. I'm sure you will find something in this useful because we've got some really cool resources today. A lot of new interesting material and shading techniques for Blender. We've got some cool geometry nodes tutorials as well. Interesting material resources, demonstrations of making artwork with Blender, a new UV unwrapping tutorial. A popular YouTube channel's been learning Blender as well, so there's a lot to talk about in this one. Before we jump in, I will let you know that we now have a new official playlist for the community roundups. So it means you can keep track of all of the tutorials and projects we've been recommending. You can see which videos you have or haven't watched yet, and you can binge them all in one go. So let's get into it. So first of all, I want to draw your attention to a channel by Fraser. They've been doing a lot of interesting material tutorials recently. That's not all they do, but that's the primary reason they've been recommended to me recently, because they've been teaching people how to achieve this quintessential like Star Wars dirty material style for starships. And I know that's a style a lot of people love doing with their hard surface artwork, so if you want to learn how to do that, the video I would definitely recommend is the How to Texture Spaceships Like ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, in Blender Cycles. A lot of the channel content does kind of revolve around this sci-fi stuff, so they'll also teach you how to make beautiful planets in Blender there, and I believe they also distribute resources kind of similar to how we do it as well. You'll also find some free tools, so following on from this shading / material tutorial, they also made a tool to help speed up that process for people, which is free to download. So we're going to take a quick look at this tutorial and I'll just highlight some interesting parts about it. So they start off from a really lovely spaceship model. You might recognize this as being a very Star Wars type shape. In doing this tutorial, they used their own texture pack, which I believe you can get from FraserFX.com. Let's take a quick look. There we go, $34, the Space Opera pack. Of course, you don't have to use this, but regardless of what textures you use or any generated noise textures in Blender, the tutorial will still be applicable. They basically show you some interesting techniques for getting like the crevice data, which we typically use ambient occlusion for, but they had some interesting ways of combining different layers of ambient occlusion to get more dirty and less dirty areas, and then combining this with texture data to break up the repetition of those masked areas. An interesting tip they showed, which I didn't actually know about, was at 104 here. I didn't actually realize that if you went down to the render settings here under viewport shading, you can restrict the render pass, so you can just show like the diffuse color, which is really interesting when you're building out materials, because we're typically used to like restricting what we can see in the shader editor by like plugging in the different parts to our color output or using Node Wrangler or something, but I didn't actually realize you could restrict the render pass in the 3D view, which might sound a bit like silly. I imagine it's something a lot of people know how to do, but it just never crossed my mind. So one thing you'll see is that as they're adding up these different layers of ambient occlusion and coloring it and combining it with the texture data, it gets this really, really believable kind of dirt buildup effect inside of the mesh. And because these are smart materials, because, you know, ambient occlusion, bevel nodes, etc., they work on the geometry of the mesh. It's a smart material, which means it can be applied to other meshes. Of course, if you're using the right type of texture mapping and projection on any image textures you're importing, you can apply this to any mesh without necessarily worrying about UV mapping. The only thing you might want to consider is something that they do highlight in this video. If you have different areas of the mesh separated into different material groups, you can then make variations of the materials and change their color, and having different copies of the material also means you can adjust those values. So I just thought this one was a really good demonstration of how to make a smart material, layering up these different effects, combining those different layers with different textures to create something that's really believable and looks fantastic from like a visual effects perspective. And like I said, taking a look at their more recent video here, they've also made a free tool to help with this. And this free tool mostly just comes in the form of like a series of node groups, which is great. I don't know if they've marked these as assets to prepare them for the asset browser, but if they haven't, then that'll be like very simple to do. So I think a lot of people are going to like that. Thank you, Christopher. Next up, heading over to the Entagma channel, which is not really a Blender specific channel. They do a lot of Houdini stuff, but recently they did a Blender tutorial, Connect the Dots with Geometry Nodes, the Plexus effect. So Plexus is basically what you see here. It's where you have a collection of dots, and depending on their proximity to other dots, they're going to draw lines between each other, and as they move, it creates this really interesting effect. You've probably seen it in a lot of other places you haven't necessarily noticed, maybe like website backgrounds and stuff like that. So it's a roughly half-an-hour video, and though they do take some good amount of time to explain the theory through annotations, I wouldn't say it's a very beginner-friendly video, because it does go into some more kind of complex aspects of geometry nodes. It's talking about how to simulate looping by creating custom index patterns, which might be a weird thing to explain. So basically, for this effect, for every point, you need to evaluate its proximity to every other point. And geometry nodes isn't really built for looping in this way at the moment. but I have it on pretty good authority that some things are coming down the pipeline. Because looping is one of those things that's going to open up like a whole world of possibilities for geometry nodes. We're going to be able to do some really intense and crazy complex effects with it. It's something I know a lot of artists are demanding, so this video is really interesting, because even without dedicated looping functionality, Entagma shows you a way which you can kind of work around that with a creative use of mathematics and attributes. There is a lot of information in here condensed into half an hour, and the end result is a rather beautiful effect. So yeah, I just wanted to quickly recommend this video because I feel like it's been drawing a lot of eyes recently, so maybe you might find it interesting. So for something a bit less heavy and more entertaining, Nerdforge have just done a video. We spent 100 hours learning Blender. So you might remember a video somewhat recently by Sarah Dici, rhymes with Peachy, where they learned how to use Blender in 24 hours. I recommended that in a previous video. That was a lovely video, and this is also a lovely video, but in this one, the two main hosts of Nerdforge here are basically doing a competition, where they're going to be watching a couple of tutorials. I believe it was the Blender Guru Donut tutorial and Grant Abbitt's Dungeon Door, and then after they make their results, they pass them to their Discord server and get them to judge on who made the best artwork. So it's a really cool and quite entertaining video. I don't want to spoil the results for you, but you can kind of see how it's going here. And one thing I always love is watching these more popular YouTubers learn Blender, because you can notice some mistakes they're making. I believe at some point in the video I noticed that they hadn't like applied the scale on the transforms of an object they were sculpting. So there's like little things you can pick out, which I always find quite entertaining. And also I believe they were duplicating instead of instancing like really high poly objects at some point. But anyway, like that's why I love watching these videos, because you can kind of lock on to what they're good at and what they haven't picked up on yet, and I always find that really entertaining. But one thing I definitely noticed is that though I haven't actually watched Nerdforge in the past, although I believe I picked up on one of their viral videos that was a PC build video, you can definitely tell that they have some artistic talent prior to using Blender. And you can tell that because people that do have artistic skills approach it in a different way. I think they're much more inclined to try adjusting and trying different things when they're following tutorials rather than following it like word for word. So yeah, it was a cool video. They seem to have a lot of fun with it, so I think you'll enjoy it. For the next video we have The Softest Fuzz You Can't Touch, Geometry Nodes in Blender by Joey Carlino. So this is quite a good video for demonstrating how to use curves in geometry nodes through quite a creative project, and this is a video that's also quite entertainingly edited as well, much more entertaining than my videos. Do you guys remember when I was funny? Oh, back in those days. Anyway, it's really lovely. Basically they take you through making different types of curves and then basically instancing these in geometry nodes around an object to create a fuzzy effect, and also how to layer them in different ways and combine them into node groups so you can independently control their values. You can say what types of curves or fuzz are more present than others. There are also some really important notes about getting color on the curves as well, something I haven't experimented with that. So basically using the UV map data and attributes to inform the curves that they should adopt the color of what's essentially under them on the mesh, and then you can end up with some fun results like this. There is also a bit of an animation bug where curves pop in and out of existence as the object moves, so they give you a little note for fixing that as well. Overall, it's quite a fun video by Joey, and as I said, like the end results are quite nice, so yeah, it might be worth checking out. The rest of their channel is also really nice. They did quite a popular video recently, Lego anything with this new Blender geometry nodes feature. They've made a tool called Scribble Gen, so if you want to get like web-like stuff, that's pretty good. Splatter generator and so on. So yeah, really cool stuff. So if you've been enjoying this video so far, remember to subscribe, because I love sharing resources with you, whether they're from other people or my own tools, and I'm really trying to lean more into providing a service to the Blender community now. Basically, I've been making some changes behind the scenes to kind of lean more into that purpose, and one of those things is on my website store page, curtisholt.online/store, as well as my own products, I now have segments where you can take a look at my recommended products from other people in the community. So you can see here there are some add-ons I find really cool, like Geoscatter, Physical Starlight and Atmosphere. Also got Real-Time Materials 2.0 by Ducky, which we'll get onto a bit later. Got some of my own stuff there, Hard Ops, the Mesh Machine add-on, and the Blender Launchpad course by CG Boost, which I still think is like one of the best courses for actually getting into Blender as a beginner. So yeah, I just wanted to let you know that you might find some interesting stuff on there as well. I might swap some of these courses and recommendations in and out over time, so if you come back over time, you might find some more interesting stuff on there. So yeah, just thought that would be useful for people. And yeah, I'm a YouTuber. What's the other thing I'm supposed to say? Oh yeah, ring that notification bell. All right, let's move on. Next up, we have a cool animated procedural mold material by Ryan King Art. Now, if you're having a bit of deja vu, I did recommend a procedural mold material by Donna Designs in 3D in a previous video. It's the same kind of technique, but I want to recommend this one as well because it's a slightly different result. And I think the results look really, really cool on this one. You can see how it can be applied to other 3D objects as well. It's a video 37 minutes long, and I think a lot of people find it useful because being able to control an effect in relation to the proximity of an object is super, super helpful. Well, procedural techniques in general are super helpful because they take a lot of the manual effort out of getting these effects. Ryan is known for doing a bunch of procedural material tutorials as well as other general Blender tutorials, and they're so close to the 100k now. I wonder if we can just push them over the edge. Do you think? They might have passed it by the time this video goes out, knowing how long I take to edit. One thing I've always liked about Ryan's videos is his presentation style is always very considerate. He explains things very well, he doesn't go too fast, like me, and everything is so well laid out, zoomed in on the video, very accessible. I just really like the quality of their videos, so if you're interested in learning how to do these kinds of degradation effects, or if you want to adapt it for your own effects in the future, then check it out. Okay, next thing I want to show you is not a tutorial, it's a project by Huang, or Huang. You know how I'm not very good with names, but it's a volumetric planet. Now, if you've been around for a while, you know I've done a lot of nebulaic stuff on this channel, so I love all this kind of thing. I think the result is really pretty. All this, you know, lovely blue emissive stuff kind of emitting energy from the planet's surface. I just think it's a lovely artistic result, and also again, because of procedural materials, very adaptable. You can change the color. And yes, if you're interested in achieving this effect, they have the file available on their ArtStation. Let's take a look. It's about £3. So I just wanted to give it a shout out because I love the look of it. Next up, we're going to go over to Ducky 3D, who I know that pretty much everyone knows who Ducky is, but I feel bad because Ducky's my boy. They're part of what I consider the 2.8 trinity, me, CG Matter, and Ducky, who rose to YouTube fame after the 2.8 Code Quest, but I just haven't recommended him much on this series, so I want to give him a bit of love. He's done this video, 10 amazing tools in Blender you need to try, and if you know Ducky, he does a lot of motion graphic stuff on his channel, so if you're interested in making these cool motion graphics effects, maybe for like VJ loops, you might find some of these tips useful. So the first tip comes from Blender 3.4, which is the volume cube node. This basically creates meshes from volume data, and that's really interesting because you can get all kinds of weird, strange, parametric-y mesh effects. And you may remember I previously recommended a video by Bad Normals on how to get interesting fractal effects in Blender, and that was also using the volume cube node. The next thing they want to talk about is basically the surprising potential of the decimate modifier for stylistic effects in Blender. You can use it to create like interesting bases for getting more interesting mesh effects. They also talk about constraints and how they use it for basically animating objects and for creating camera rigs. Constraints are super useful. I've been using them more recently. In fact, something I haven't spoken about yet. I was going to maybe do a video on like some of my recent Patreon experiments. I'm waiting until I have enough, but I created a variation file of Chris Bettini's like underwater shader effect we recommended in the last video. And I basically created this view tunnel where a water tunnel is attached to a camera, but the light sources are constrained, so they're always pointing the same angle no matter which way the camera with the view tunnel is looking. So constraints are really useful for all different kinds of effects. Ducky does a good job in this video of explaining how they use them. They also recommend their own add-on, the real-time materials add-on. And one thing I like about Ducky is, quite like me, the stuff that he makes first and foremost for himself, which I think is like the best way to do it, because you have more of a personal connection to the things you're making. And essentially, because we're all making artwork, we're all going to find it useful. There are over 200 materials in their material pack, and the add-on has actually mostly been coded by someone in our community, the Curtis Holt Discord server, Joshua Bloomer. And a lot of the materials contributed in this pack have also been made by Sharon, Just 3D Things, who's also a strong member of our community. So Ducky and I, we have like a spiritual overlap in our communities, and that's another reason why I want to recommend him. Anyway, there is more. So another thing they want to recommend is mesh to curve and curve to mesh, basically creating a custom wireframe modifier essentially inside of the geometry nodes trees, which has an important benefit over the traditional wireframe modifier in the fact that you can use custom profiles to control the shape of how the wireframe actually looks. The only downside is it's difficult to get caps connecting them at the end, which the traditional wireframe modifier does automatically. So it's basically like a trade-off of what you need. They also talk about the dual mesh node, which is fantastic for getting all kinds of interesting hexagonal effects. And there are more tips as well, but I don't want to spoil all of them, so maybe check them out. And like I said, Ducky has their real-time materials pack. This is a collection of over 200 materials that work in both Eevee and cycles, and they're separated into all kinds of different categories, so there's bound to be something useful for you there. I'll leave my affiliate link down in the description if you want to pick it up. And there's also a free demo of 40 materials, which you can give a try. So yeah, really cool stuff. Next video I want to recommend comes from RenderRides. This is their Halloween video, where they show you how they make... Oh damn it, my camera overheated. Alright, never mind. But anyway, in this lovely video tutorial, they show you how they made this fantastic Halloween artwork. But the really cool thing about this video is they basically take you through the entire process. And they also happen to make a tiny cameo. Hello. Anyway, they tell you about the tools they use. So they gather references, how they're making the characters using the human generator add-on, which is actually like really cool and very customizable in Blender. How they get some objects from Sketchfab. Actually, they get quite a few objects from Sketchfab. It just goes to show how good the variety of content is on their website. Using Marvelous Designer for doing the cloth. So yeah, it's not completely Blender specific, but I think it's a very useful demonstration showing how you can combine the softwares to make artwork like this. How they set up the environment, also some interesting techniques about using the Ant kind of integrated landscape add-on for Blender to kind of displace the ground. How they use Quixel to get some ground assets as well. Using Botanic, the add-on for all different types of like trees and vegetation. How they create a physical sign by taking an image or a couple of images and then cutting it out of the plane using the knife tool to essentially create the custom sign for the dog. They had an interesting tip about lighting where they essentially took curves and then icospheres and then used the array modifier to duplicate those icospheres along the curves to essentially make fairy lights, which I thought was quite an interesting technique. They also showed how you can use the object info node in the shader editor and take the random value, which would essentially allow you to get like random color values based on a color ramp, which means you don't have to create individual materials for each of the lights. It will just randomly assign it for each object. Another cool little thing as well is basically taking cutouts of people and using them as background objects, well, objects in quotes, rather just image planes, but it's surprisingly effective, especially if you've got strong depth of field back there. And they also take you through their post-processing process as well, and how they adjust everything to get the final result. And I think it looks lovely. So it's a nice demonstration of actually, going from complete start to complete finish, using Blender as a workflow tool to make the artwork. So yeah, really nice video, RenderRides. Okay, let's see. Am I alive? I'm back. All right. There is still more to show you, so let's see what's next. So there was someone I briefly met at the Blender conference who I didn't get a proper chance to speak to, but I got some really good vibes from their personality, and I want to recommend their channel, Simon3D. So they seem to have an affinity for doing stylized work, like anime or manga type work. You can see make your stylized animations look fast, anime style procedural fire, anime style explosion effect, flying animation, impact frames, which is pretty cool. I really like the style of this content, as you can see here. I'm sure there are a lot of people that want to do anime type work in Blender, so I feel like this would be a really cool resource for you. And taking a look at their recent video, which was about making the animation look fast, they essentially again go start to finish. So you can see where they're grabbing the Mixamo Human Classic, importing it into Blender, creating the ground, creating a wave texture for the ground, creating the procedural action lines with the shader editor, animating it with the mapping node, using the modifier stack to kind of kick up this procedural dust, then going through the process of shading it to make it look more stylized, getting a lovely background, bringing it all together with compositing. And yeah, I think that's a pretty cool tutorial. So thank you very much. I'm sure people will appreciate the videos. Next up, we have my boy Grant Abbitt. Wait, Curtis, is everyone your boy? Okay, well, Grant Abbitt's my boy because he was the first person that ever gave me a shout out, and I really appreciate him. And it kind of showed me how sharing attention with other people can really make a massive difference, which is why these videos are so important to me. Anyway, it's a lovely video, basically breaking down how UV unwrapping works, where it's appropriate to put seams on your objects or where not to put seams, and when you actually need them, because you don't always need to use seams or UV maps for that matter, depending on where you're going to be texturing, how you're going to be texturing, where your object is going to be used, like in different softwares or just inside of Blender, etc. And I really like the presentation style of this video. Grant Abbitt is an experienced teacher. He's got a fantastic presentation style. He knows when to take the time to stop and explain things and what parts to skip over, although he doesn't really skip over anything here. As you can see, it's done in more of like a video essay type format, which I know a lot of people love. And I just think it's a really good breakdown video overall, especially if you are new to Blender, which I know some of you watching are. I think this will be a good one to watch because UV mapping is quite daunting and quite complicated to start with. But if you stick with it, you can really pick up an intuition for where to place seams for your UV maps. Useful video, recommended. So we've taken a look at quite a few tutorials. What about some inspiration? Because it's November, which means that the Nodevember challenge has been going on, which is basically where people can follow a series of prompts to create some interesting artwork using only nodes. So like shader nodes, geometry nodes, although this year it's mostly geometry nodes. And it doesn't just have to be Blender, but it is like a very Blender-centric challenge. But if you go to hashtag Nodevember 2022 on Twitter, you can basically scroll down and just see a continuous series of really cool, really inspiring artworks made using nodes. There's lots of stuff to investigate here, and I just think it's always a fantastic source of inspiration. So yeah, that's one of the things I've always liked about Twitter. So Yeah, with all the stuff going on, I hope it doesn't change too much, but all these wonderful people making beautiful things. Anyway, we're nearly done, but not quite finished yet. There's another video I want to recommend. This one is not a tutorial, but it is a project which did make heavy use of Blender, and it's What's Inside the Titanic by Jared Owen. Now, they do a bunch of these lovely breakdown videos explaining how things work, basically the internals of things. Let me take a look at the channel. So they got the Titanic, how does a VCR work, how does the Mars rover work, Big Ben, helicopter, Enigma machine, Soyuz rocket, Statue of Liberty, etc. So these are all like animated videos made in Blender showing how stuff works. So if you're interested in like these kind of documentary channel type, how it's made things, then you're going to love this channel. The Titanic one is their most recent one, and this was really impressive to me because everything was modeled out. I believe they took like the actual ship hull from a different model, but then like manually modeled the interior, and it's really complex. As you can see, like they will break down everything about the ship, like every level of the ship, what all the different areas are intended for. So I just thought that this was just super impressive. The Titanic is something that's really interesting to me, but I'm also kind of scared of it because, you know, I'm a bit afraid of the idea of like shipwrecks, going down with the ship, all that horrifying, traumatic stuff, but it does have this interesting element to it. And I feel like this is a YouTube channel that a lot of people are going to enjoy. So yeah, just wanted to recommend that one. And also, before we close this up, I'll let you know that over on my second channel, Kurt Studio, I recently did a review of the different artworks for our Discord community challenge for Spooktober. Basically, we do art challenges on my Discord every now and again, and I'll occasionally do breakdowns where I take a look and give some advice and feedback for the artwork. So yeah, if you made it this far through the video, put a ship emoji in the comments so I can see who you are. This helps me to know how many people made it this far through the video, and it's always lovely seeing like the flood of emojis in the comments. Remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You can check out the playlist if you want to check out the other community roundups. Here are my lovely patrons. If you want to help support this channel and all the projects we do, you can sign up to that and also get your hands on some experimental files. And of course, you can check out the store at curtisholt.online/store because it's the Curtis Holt online store. See what I did there? So yeah, have a fantastic day, everyone. Stay safe, and I will see you next time.